Hey everybody, it's Amy from Magic and Light Collection. You can find all of our products at www.magicandlightcollection.com. So I have a new set for you guys. It's called the Magic Light Action Pack, and it will give you some really cool light and dark effects for your images. You can see for Elements users, there are some interesting new thumbnails here in your effects palette. They are some light ones that will produce light effects in your image, and there are darkness actions that will produce darkness effects in your image. This image here is of my daughter, and it's interesting because it's a little bit dark, but there's some cool light that's coming through here that I'd like to accentuate. This is where the image started. You can see I have run the Vintage Magnolia action from Vintage Spring action set, which you can find on our website. And you want to make sure that you're working with an image that has already been corrected and edited, because these are just light effects and not image correcting effects like the Vintage Spring action set would be. So on this image, I want to go ahead and run darkness left and double click there, and you can see that it darkens the left side of my image. So what I'm looking for is, where is the light coming from? In this image, the light is coming from behind her. There is no light coming from the left side. There's no light coming from the foreground. So I want to make sure that I am bringing out the light that's in the background. So I'm going to darken the left side. Next, I'm going to darken the foreground, because like I just said, there's no light coming from there. So I'm going to double click darkness foreground. Now that looks great, but it's way too dark on her dress and her face. So I'm going to go ahead and take some of that off. This is a white layer mask. Make sure that you're working with a black brush. So I'm selecting the brush tool with a black foreground color. I'm going to turn the opacity of my brush up to 100%, and I'm going to brush the darkness off of her dress and off of her face. I'm not going to brush it off of her hair, because I like that the hair is a little bit darker against the backlighting. I'm going to take that off. I'm not being super careful because I'm trying to cut down on the time of the tutorial, but you might want to be just a little bit more careful when you're doing it. Okay, so now that's done, and we can see this is where we started before I added the darkness, and this is where we are now. You can tell that the subject stands out much more, and it becomes a little bit more dramatic. The next thing I want to do is add a little bit of light. Now, there's 3 light actions included with the Magic Light Action Pack. There's background center light, left light, and right light, and none of our light sources are coming from those directions. And so I've included 7 overlays that are flexible for you to choose where you want the light to come from. So I'm going to go to File, Place, and navigate to wherever I'm keeping my light overlays that you received with your zip file. I'm going to choose Light Flare as the first one, double click, and you can see it comes through pretty small. I'm just going to drag it to where I want the light flare to be, which is here. This is where the sun seems to be coming from to me. So I'm going to make it bigger. There's no need to really constrain the proportions on these overlays. You can do it however you want. So now I'm going to put it here where I think the light is coming from. Now make sure that you're making this realistic. If there was no sun coming from back here and I put the light overlay, it would look kind of funny. So make sure that you're being realistic with your images. This technique that I'm going to use, the first one, I'm going to put this light flare on overlay. So I'm going to go to my blending modes and choose overlay. You can see that this creates a little bit of a path here in the trees for the light. Now I'm going to duplicate this layer, and I'm going to put this layer on screen. This will create the hazy sunlight. So I have a path of light through the trees, and I have a hazy sun flare. The next thing that I want to do is use another overlay. So I'm going to go to File, Place, and I'm going to choose Magic Light. These are flexible, so you can choose where you want to put them, and make sure that you rotate them, transform them, size them so that it looks realistic. I'm going to use the Move tool and make this bigger. And since the light is coming from over here, I want to move this light overlay over here. I'm going to make it big enough so that it just touches the back of her head here. Okay, that looks pretty good. So you can see that it's a little bit heavy. You can keep it on the normal blending mode. In some cases that might be appropriate. In this case I'm going to put it on screen. So now I have a hazy sunlight that blends in just a little bit better with my image. Now a problem area here is an edge. We need to go ahead and take that off. So using the eraser tool, set at 100%, I'm going to take off this edge. I'm going to click my layer on and off to make sure that there aren't any more harsh edges. I can see one here, and I can see one here. The next thing that I want to do is lower the opacity of my eraser to 20%. I'm going to use a bigger brush, and I'm going to brush over these areas to make it look just a little bit more realistic. The sunlight would be coming through a narrow hole right here, and so it probably would not cover the entire image over to this point. So I just want to make that a little bit more realistic. So this is before Magic Light, and this is after. You can use the master opacity slider to take down the effect of that layer. I kind of like it on 100%, so I'm going to keep it there. So let's check before we move on to the next layer that see where we started. This is where we started, and this is where we are now. We have a really dramatic darkening, and we have a really dramatic sun flare that accentuates the backlighting behind her head. This is the before. This is where we are now. The next layer I'm going to add is called Dreamlight, and it's part of the overlays. So I'm going to go to File, Place, navigate to where I'm keeping my overlays, and I'm going to select Dreamlight. So you can see it places it on the image, and this doesn't work with the black background the way it is. I'm going to click the check mark to place it on there, and then I'm going to change the blending mode to Screen. Screen is the only blending mode that will work with Dreamlight overlay. Now I'm going to use the Move tool to move and transform Dreamlight so that it fits within the beam of light that's coming from behind the trees. So I'm going to make it a little bit smaller. I'm going to place it here and rotate it. Okay, so you can see that that doesn't really work very well. What we want to do is one of two things. We can erase this area right here and right here because we want it to look like there's this awesome lens flare coming from the sun that's coming behind her head. So I could do that, or I could transform the overlay by going to Image, Transform, Distort, and then I can use these handlebars to really make it look like it's coming from behind the trees. So you'll just want to mess with it until you get it right, just until it looks good to you. Okay, so for right now that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to click the check mark to place it on there, and now it's on the regular move tool, so I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. Okay, that looks good. Now there are still some areas that I need to erase, and so I'm going to choose the eraser tool, put it on 100%, and I'm just going to erase these edges, any of these harsh edges. Again, I'll click the layer on and off to try to identify some of the edges. So I'm seeing edges right here. Okay, so we'll leave it at that. And I also would like to take it off of her face here. So let's just take that off. I'm going to use my eraser at a lower opacity to take this down a little bit because I feel like it's a little bit distracting. Okay, so that looks good to me. Regularly I would mess with this a little bit more, but I really just want to show you guys how to use it. Let's check where we started. This is where we started. This is where we are now. It's a big impact. This collection really has the power to give you some amazing light effects. You can find it on our website. It's only $25 for 17 effects. This is pretty low priced, and I think that it's definitely going to make a big difference for you guys. So you can find it at www.magicandlightcollection.com. Thanks!